Hello there, my friend, and welcome to the Ayurveda and Psychology podcast. I am Charlotte Skogsberg, your host for this podcast. I am enchanted to meet and to take you with me on this journey into the human psyche, viewed from the holistic approach of yoga and Ayurveda, and viewed from the modern man approach of clinical psychology and psychoanalysis. So have something nice to drink next to you, maybe a cup of tea, have a seat, or go out for a nice walk in nature maybe. Enjoy. In today's episode, I want to dedicate this moment to Ayurveda, and I want to speak about something that is really how you start with Ayurveda. I want to speak about those of us out there who go through moments where we're feeling quite okay, and then we're going through moments where we're not feeling well at all right? So this is what we would call imbalance, but more than imbalance, actually being unwell or even ill or even, fully going into sickness. And there's plenty of people out there who are feeling really unwell, who are feeling sick, and who are looking at Ayurveda or any other, let's say, alternative to the traditional modern pharmaceutical world, and asking, that looks great, but how do I start? Like, what's the first step? Where I am today and to being well feels like such a humongous gap that I'm already depleted just by the idea of it. And I think that is something we can all relate to, because we can all recognize having been in any kind of situation where we are right here, right now, which is not where we want to be. And then we look at where we want to be. And it seems as if that is not accessible to us. And so we are discouraged before we even begin. Now, in Ayurveda, we recognize this. And this is why many of the principles in Ayurveda are stated the way they are, and I will go into that. It is really due to this, state of being unwell, looking at what seems to be well, and feeling as if it's impossible to get there. And in a way, I would even like to equal that to what is the difference between being in resistance, being in frustration, being upset or attached to something, and the feeling of letting go, actually. So it sounds so easy to just say let go, right? And one example that is quite frustrating yet so true is to just imagine yourself carry a backpack, a really heavy backpack, a 30 kilo backpack that you're carrying as you're walking on a road, in the desert, in the sun, or whatever, something really that feels just very difficult, right? And it's a struggle. The walk in itself is a struggle, isn't it? And yet you're pushing and you're striving and you're trying to move forward. And what would really help you in that situation would be to say to yourself, what is not serving me right now? What could I lose that would actually make this walk one of ease? And the simplest answer is to let the backpack go, to put it down, and just that relief that you're feeling is amazing, isn't it? And then all of a sudden life just feels so much easier. And it is a little bit the same thing, actually. I know it sounds very simplified. When it comes to being in a state of illness and in a state of wellness. whether it's physical, mental, or emotional. Don't forget that they're not separate, but that the manifestations can seem to be on one of the three levels and not necessarily on all three at the same time. And as a way to illustrate my point and then start to explain how Ayurveda gives you the different steps on the journey back to wellness, I would just want to take my own very recent experience as an example. Whether you are far from living an Ayurvedic kind of life or that you're living an Ayurvedic kind of life, you will still experience moments of balance and moments of imbalance. The biggest difference is, I would say, the way I see it anyway, is that you will be aware of the imbalance much earlier when you are already living in an Ayurvedic kind of life, which means that you will be able to nip it in the bud, as they say, quicker than when you are not really aware of what's happening to you. And you will also know a little bit more what to do to begin with. And you will also have a certain level of confidence, I would say, that you will get back to feeling more balanced, simply because you have experienced it before. And recently, but so basically, even though I live this and I'm learning my whole life, there is still movement in my life, which means that movement makes the doshas move, which means that you are more easily finding your way out of balance the more there is movement of some kind, whether it's in one way or another. Just like I was having a conversation with my very good friend yesterday, where she explained that she had been feeling so well balanced in the beginning of the year, and then came a time where she was in this relationship with someone, a romantic one, and already actually being in the relationship would probably put some imbalance in there. And then as the relationship came towards an end after about 6 months, then all of a sudden she found herself now feeling quite out of balance. And it's normal. I mean, even without talking Ayurveda, we would say it's normal because, there's the heart ache and, all of that. But it's also the fact that there has been movement. If you were living in status quo, where nothing really changed, it is much easier to keep your doshas in check, to keep them from moving around. But of course, when there's things happening in your life, it means that there's movement, which means doshas moving, which means imbalance happening. So one of the first things to say to oneself, I think, when this happens is, this is normal. There has been movement going on in my life, which means that my doshas have been moving, and which means that I am prone to imbalance. And so once I've had as well a little bit of knowledge maybe about my own tendencies, if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say this, you can go back to the episode where I talk about tendencies. And also recognize that, okay, because of the movements of my life and therefore my doshas and my personal constitution, I know that my tendency can be this or that. And so I can recognize that I've gone into my tendencies as I've been moving a little bit away from balance. And so taking my own personal experience, recent experience, was that since I have myself quite a strong tendency, both of Vata and Pitta, but with, I would say, a quite strong dominance though, of Pitta inside of me, what happens is that I can have a tendency of moving into too much overachieving, wanting, feeling good about that, and then ending up a little bit depleted, right? And that's kind of what happened not so long ago. And I did recognize quite early on, but only on a physical level, only when it started to manifest physically actually, that I had probably overdone it a little bit. What I hadn't noticed back then, and that took me quite some time to come into that understanding, was that the imbalance, of course, had started first on a more subtle level. So there was a mental an emotional side to it. And the only thing that I changed when I noticed that I was feeling depleted, weak actually, with my 3 a.m. wake ups and things like that, that will tend to happen to me, was that I only really changed something on a physical level, and I kept on doing exactly the same things on a mental level. So I didn't really understand why I didn't really see an improvement, even though I took, let's say, 1, 2, or even more so weeks off from my full-on, quite fiery Ashtanga Mysore practice. And what happens in those moments is that me, just like anyone else with that tendency, will become frustrated with the fact that we don't recognize ourselves the way we usually are with our capacities. And so the overachiever in me, the Pitta person in me, would be, I'm usually much more focused, action-oriented, goal-oriented, and striving towards what my results were, what my to-do list was, or whatever. And all of a sudden, I would just feel as if I could not focus, I could not concentrate, I could not produce, and I wouldn't really understand why, since I did take time off from the physical practice. Except that, of course, this is where it's so hard, right? Because I need to tend to the mental part of it. But my mental part of it is hard to step away from, since it's also the reality that I'm seeing, if you understand me. If you've listened to the psychology episode on self-image, there's a correlation here. So basically, since I didn't take my pink filtered sunglasses off, it was hard for me to see that it was not just the reality, but it was actually my tendency that was keeping me from coming back to balance again. And it was only when someone from the outside who could then recognize it, because they were looking at me from a more objective reality, saying this is probably because you haven't tended to the mental side of the imbalance. And so I did. And naturally, it would, after actually just a few days, gently start to come back to normal balance again. So some of the things that I do in order to bring myself back to balance when I am far from balance, and this is not just on, oh, I'm feeling a little bit out of whack. It is really when we're talking about sickness, okay? When we have been ill, what do we do to take the first step to bring ourselves back to balance? I have mentioned before, if you follow me on the social media, that in Ayurveda we talk about only doing things, especially physically, but on all levels, to 50% of your capacity. And this is more specifically when you are out of balance, so that you are working your way back to balance, okay? Once you are balanced, it is, of course, possible for you to go into your full capacity when you do different things. Yet there's it's important to be recognizing that. But that is also when we bring a different kind of quality into what we're doing in full capacity. I'll talk about the qualities in another episode, okay? Not to mix everything up. So what does this look like? Now, if I would just start again with my own example, since I've been talking about that, and then I'm going to go into what anyone who's never done any of this before should do. I then stopped my very full-on 2.5 hour long practice every day of Ashtanga Mysore style in the tropics, where it's also then already quite a Pitta environment when it's hot, because it was going between dry season to rainy season, and so it was just hot as well before the rain starts, or properly. First, you might need to actually stop fully for a little bit, for a few days, not to do anything. And then what we want to do is to begin to implement, as I was saying, gradually only to 50% of your capacity. So what did that look like for me? Remembering that I am a very active person. So since 10 years or so, it would be my daily routine to go running. Okay, so I would run for somewhere between 4 and 6 kilometers per day. And that would be my daily thing, and also yoga. And then, of course, the more I got into my Mysore practice, I would actually have to stop running because you can't do both. It's just impossible to do, especially at least in the same day. So what I did was that I needed to rest a few days in order to at least get some kind of energy level back. And then I would take walks. So I would go out for a walk that was almost as long as the running that I would do. And I would either, depending on how far I was from feeling my energy levels more or less normal, walk very slowly, more almost as walking meditation, if you've heard of that, where you actually just pay attention to the steps that you're taking, what the sensation is of the soil underneath your feet, for instance. So being in Bali, I had the advantage of being able to walk on the beach. So feeling the bare feet on the ground as well. So that brings a very grounding, nice sensation into it. Feeling the cold water running over my feet, the sand going in between my toes, things like that. And that would be a slow walk of almost up to 4 kilometers to begin with. And that would be enough for me. And then after a couple of days, when that felt as if it was quite easy actually to do, I would increase my tempo, my rhythm as I was walking. And little by little, this would come back into more of an almost power walk kind of exercise, where I would also begin to, the more I felt then that I rested, use my muscles. I would be focusing on engaging from the core, feeling my glutes, feeling my legs, things like that. So there was still this walking meditation part of what I was doing, but it was more focused on the internal sensations because I had the capacity to do so, because I was not depleted anymore. So you can see how you begin to work your way back up to a certain level. Then once I started to feel that, okay, now taking this more power walk kind of quality to my morning exercise, and that felt as I got home, I was still actually quite feeling strong and in a good mood, I would add on just some actually exercises. So this would be what you would usually see maybe people doing in a gym or like in an aerobic whatever. And I would focus on specific parts of my body that would, for me, be very important, which is linked to the core. Okay, so core muscles. So that's essential for everyone. Our core muscles, most people are actually weak in their core, even those with the super, six-pack and all of that, are very often actually not working the small, very important internal core muscles when they do all these like gymming and the weights and all of that, okay? So there can be very subtle movements that are still working on extremely important muscles in your core. Why is it important to work on the core? It's because it's the muscle that holds us up. So it creates a structure in our body, and the stronger our core is, the more we will actually come from the deepest part of our capacity of power, I would say, and strength, which means that we are not compensating with other parts of the body, which means that we are less prone to injure ourselves when we do things because we're compensating, okay? And so once that I started to feel that this was already making me feel still quite fine after having taken my power walk, done some of these exercises, then I would come back into a light run. Okay, now this run would not look like the 5-6 Ks run at this pace that I would do at the point where I was at the highest of my capacity. It would look like something very different to that, more of a gentle kind of slow running, and that would be probably more close to the between 3 and 4 kilometers. So then I would step back down again in terms of how far I would go. But because I was running, I was obviously using my energy in a different way once again, okay? And then I would even notice that after these first runs, I would not be capable of doing any kind of exercise afterwards. So it was only after having done these runs for a couple of days, maybe even taking just one day out of 2 running and the next day nothing. And when I felt that, okay, now I'm feeling strong even as I come back from the run, then I would add in those exercises again. So can you see how it is a way of making a program for yourself over the next couple of days, the next couple of weeks, maybe even the next month, before you work your way back into feeling strong and energetic again. Those of you listening to me saying, okay, this sounds good, I can do that. There's also the whole rest of the Ayurvedic Dinacharya, which is the daily routine, that will help you. So especially if you are not using the best capacity of the day for what you're doing, which means that if you are going to bed at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and that you're waking up around 8 or 9 in the morning, and that you're trying to do these kind of exercises after that, or that you're eating at this or that time, you're having your dinner at 10 p.m. or things like that, then you're already starting from further away than I was when I needed to bring myself back to balance. So even though I want you to implement this, especially if you are not very used to the exercise, or if simply you're really unwell, doesn't matter how fit you usually are, go back to thinking 50% of my capacity only. And then begin to also implement the Ayurvedic routine when it comes to the day. And this means waking up with the sun. Yes, it does. Ideally, a little bit before the sun comes up. And then once the sun goes down, that's when you also stop the fiery things in your life. This means all the screens. This means anything that is actually heating you up, anything that is stimulating. So as the sun goes down, you also want to calm everything down in your system. Screens, different kinds of stimulants of like music or whatever that can be, fiery kind of foods, or even food in itself, because you don't want to have your digestive system trying to function with a meal, digesting a meal once the sun is down, because it's not actually the time of the day when that's the most, let's say, effective work of your digestive system to be doing, okay? So you want to work with easy things like that. You want to wake up a little bit before the sunrise, and you want to start to slow down as the sun goes down. That means that if you can have your last meal as the sun sets, or ideally maybe even a little bit before that, depends on where you are, of course. And, you know, if you are in like myself when I'm in Sweden, where I'm from, around this time of the year, which is, the end of the year, then naturally it will be difficult to have your last meal before the sun sets, since the sun sets around 3-4 in the afternoon. So you obviously have to adapt to that. That also means that maybe you shouldn't eat too late, and maybe your meal that you're having at the end of the day, where it's already a little bit dark, needs to be something that's very easily digestible for your system. You also want to use the time of the day between sunrise and before the sun actually comes quite high to do these exercises. So you want to get the body actually to sweat before it begins to be the warmest part of the day, so that you don't get your pitta, no matter what constitution you have, you still have pitta inside of you, so that's the fire, right? You don't want to get that out of whack, even if it's another one that's out of whack, by pushing yourself like crazy in the warmest part of the day, because that is going to make you feel more depleted, because it's going to be more difficult to do it at that time of the day. You also want to try to get the biggest part of your night within the hours of the night where the body really needs it in order to restore, which is between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Okay? So this means that if you can make sure that you are sleeping by 10, then naturally you will sleep till after 2 as well, I hope for you. But at least you have the deepest sleep in those hours, because that's actually when your body is doing a lot of the detoxing from the day. So just a few simple things of that to bring into your new routine, and then remembering the 50% capacity and work your way back to health. That is the best way for you to bring yourself from sickness to health. Even if you have never been into any of the health trends or anything like that, you can start with something just as simple as that. Get up when the sun comes up. Move before the sun is too high. Make sure that you hydrate as well during the day. Don't drink 1 liter of water straight away, but make it into small sips throughout the day. Try to have your biggest meal in the middle of the day. Try to have your last meal, ideally as the sun sets, or if it needs to be later, make sure that it's an easily digestible meal. And try to sleep by 10 p.m. Once you do your exercise that you do before the highest moment of the day, or before the sun is at its highest, I want to say, make sure that you are starting really slowly. Start only with walks, especially if you've never done much exercise before, but even if you usually are a fit person, start with walking. It's ideal. Once you feel walking is really easy for me, then you upgrade a little bit more. If you're someone who usually runs 10Ks and now you're sick, don't go out running for 10Ks. Start with seeing if you can walk for 5. Thank you so much for choosing to listen to this podcast and this episode. I am very grateful. If you enjoyed this and you think that other people could enjoy this, please help me to spread the word. Share this episode on any channel that you have of social media or messaging. And even more so, I would really appreciate if you know one other person who might benefit from my words today specifically. Take that 1 minute it takes to simply share this episode with one person. Remember that there's a human being on the other side of your phone, of your earpods, of this microphone. And I would love to hear your thoughts on what I've been talking about. So please leave a comment. Send me a message directly if you wish. This is Charlotte. This is me. See you next time. Namaste.